Right then, Mark, back again for, I think this is episode 10, unless I'm miscounting, but I'm pretty sure it's episode 10. Obviously, really enjoyed the conversation last week with Alan Keane. Nice to have a guest. Nice to be able to sort of interact with somebody who's, at the coalface and, engaging with that, and seemed like we've got a lot of interest from that. And it was just really good. I sent Alan a message afterwards and said, it's just always really great to engage with him, because I always find his enthusiasm, energy, quest for excellence really invigorating.
Yeah, and he shares it well. And that's how he coaches. It's interesting. He's that flow he has of being thoughtful and sharing in an honest way, but sharing with some context all the time, as opposed to just a statement. I think he's really good to listen to on that side.
Good, yeah, I totally agree. And I also thought had some reflections after the conversation as well, a little bit about this whole space around the way things are messaged, if you like, and in particular some of the ecological stuff. I was watching a live stream last night, actually, which was there's quite a big movement within the combat sport world, particularly in Brazilian jiu-jitsu, grappling in general, around things like ecological approach. And there was a particular guy who's got a YouTube channel called Bren Does Movement. I'm not going to try and pronounce his surname because it's beyond me, but he was hosting a debate with an ex-Olympian, and they were discussing kind of grappling approaches and having this sort of traditional versus type approach. It's just interesting how sometimes the dialogue gets drawn into this sort of versus dichotomy. And I guess from Alan's perspective, when we talk about, kind of how he operates within this world, just made me think about how there's so much misconception and misunderstanding around what people are saying around approaches and how people feel like. I mean, I know people in the past, for example, with you, have felt that you're really uncompromising and like really kind of fixed on your own method, which isn't true. You are uncompromising and relentless when it comes to whatever it is that we've pre-agreed. And if you're going to follow the approach, then follow through and, own it and live it and drive it. And Alan definitely is somebody, I think, that, as much as is humanly possible, fully lives his philosophy, his approach, and he doesn't, I wouldn't say he practices PDS exactly maybe as you would. What he's done is, and this is what you're perfectly happy to do, is he's made it his own for his context, for the world that he's operating in. He just utilizes the ideas, tools, and reference points in the way that works. And I think that's true of ecological approach as well. I don't think anybody's ever said it's the only way. I don't think anybody has ever, well, I mean, if I have, then I definitely got that wrong and I'll pull it back. But I've never said it was the only way. So it's the only way for me, because it just aligns perfectly with my values and how I see the world and how I see learning and the environments that I want to create. And it's not I don't want to go back to what I was doing before, because I'm pretty ashamed of some of the things that I was doing before. And again, I'm not saying that's necessarily the approach, just me. But it was really interesting to see how, Alan's such a curious person and how he's keen to intertwine, different ideas and make them part of his practice. And it's really good to talk to somebody who's like prepared to sort of be open and vulnerable about how they're doing that.
Yeah, there's a few interesting points in there. I think one that I know we've discussed on previous episodes, in fact, I think the last two link into this discussion as well, is that point of, I think some people want you to say you're this or you're that, as opposed to saying, well, actually there's some texture to what I do, but I can definitely quantify it, and there's some thoughtfulness behind how I coach, why I coach, in what way, linked to what I believe success is. And I think that is where any approach, if misunderstood or not promoted effectively, and that's where social media is terrible because it's little few minute hits, is that point of, oh, so you're telling me it's that. without further investigation. It's the same as PDS is the performance development systems. The needs-centered coaching element is only part of the performance development systems. The embedding change culture process, the supporting and the mentoring side, all of those elements are part of the system, but it's so large. It's not to say, oh, so you have to do it this way. So no. What it provides you with clear options that then you can choose, but you're not guessing in the dark. Now you're being more aware of why you're making that choice and more accurately aware on what you're actually doing in your own self-awareness, but also linked to what are you attempting to do here? What is success for you? Okay, now you can make the choices. But if you make a choice, make sure you reflect on it openly. Have you got those skills? So I think with ecological dynamics, I think, and this is, again, my view, but I think, going back to that, it's not analogy, is it? It might be analogy. I think there's another word for it, where the two trees and the river in between. Is that an analogy, or is there another word for that?
Metaphor.
There we go, metaphor. I knew it was in there. I knew I didn't know, so there it was. There you go. And I'll no doubt forget what it is again in about a year's time. So that as an example is, if you really looked at it, I mean, that's a nice way to explain it, especially with, the leaves at the top. But if you looked at it at a practical level, I would suggest you could take the river away and you would say there's a whole forest, and on one side of the forest, there's no, you cannot tell, you must do this, with a real lack of understanding on, no, are you really understanding why you're doing what you're doing? And then the other extreme at the other end of the forest is, no, you have no thought, athlete. I've planned this. You will stand there. You will do this. We will rep it, and I will shout and tell you what you did wrong. And then I'm expecting that to happen in the match. And when it doesn't, it's your fault. So they're the extremes of the forest. And I think then as you move into the forest, there's a light and shade of, okay, so you do a little bit of decision-making stuff. You put opposition against people. Okay, you're putting in some little trickery there. You're extending the width of the pitch or shortening it in certain... Oh, you're doing that. Okay, well, that's part of that. Okay, so there are times like Alan shared where I'm definitely a need-centered. I'm definitely looking at that ecological approach. But also there are times when if someone thinks ecological approach is never tell, well, actually, no, I tell, but this is when I tell, but it's mindfulness and thoughtful. Whereas someone else might go, no, that's part of it, but it's potentially not explained well enough for people that haven't really investigated it. And I think that's the same challenge with PDS, as you've said over the years, is people tend to like, and I'm generalizing it, I'm going to find a way very quickly to understand what something is. Some things are so big, you won't know what it is in 30 seconds. You won't know what it is by just asking one person. You need to really start investigating it, exploring it without filters, and that may take some time. So where are your resources to go and do it? Now I have a better understanding. Okay, now I can make an informed opinion on what that is and what it is not. Okay, I'm in a better place now. But we live in a world now, especially with social media, has become so advanced from when it first arrived. Everyone wants something in short hits. Everyone wants something, okay, this is what it is. This is what it is. What do you think it is? Well, you're very credible. So if you say it's no good or it's this, I must believe you. As opposed to say, well, no, you're credible in that area, but this area, maybe I don't agree with you or you're not credible at all. So let's step back. And I think that's where many approaches, there are light and shade, but there's also misunderstanding. And that's the other negativity where someone might say, oh, I kind of do that. Well, hang on a minute. When you say you kind of do it, what are you actually doing and what are you not doing? Because that's the discussion we need to have, because the generalization and the gray is where things start to go wrong, right?
Yeah, and I think the forest or the jungle metaphor actually is quite useful, and it's one that we can maybe extend. You've given me a chance to extend a metaphor, and now that's it. Now there's no going back. Yeah,
I mean, seasons in there, Stuart.
Well, maybe. I suppose the what came to mind when you were saying that was, I think people don't understand what the underpinning, like what the kind of the roots are. So the roots go much, much deeper. It's a bit like an iceberg, I suppose. The roots go much, much deeper than the trunk and the branches of the various trees. And there's way more to them. And certain organisms, thrive in a certain space. And so whilst the tree canopy can intertwine and intermingle, the roots basis is still really quite different. And the way that the organism operates is really quite different, and its internal operating system, I suppose. And I think of, to go away from the natural metaphor and more to a kind of more technological metaphor, I tend to think of PDS and ecological dynamics, or the ecological approach, as operating systems in some respects. So it's kind of a way in which it's what guides my operational kind of approach. But underneath that is some source code. And it's a little bit like using different languages in a source code. So, for example, if you were trying to blend two different coding languages, I do not know enough about technology to be able to describe these, but if you were, your operating system would go haywire. It would be confused, like the various things, the functions that you want to do, they would intertwine. And then the user at the end of the operating system would it be equally, struggling to be able to operate. And so I think about it in those terms a little bit. So you have to understand what your source code is. And I think a lot of people feel as if they can sort of pick and choose a little bit from different, different kind of source codes and like blend them together to create a new operating system. You can't. You can use different operating systems. Right, of course you can. Right, you can use different applications that run on those operating systems. They're going to run differently from each operating system, but you can still use them all. And if they have utility to the end user, and it means the end user can then do what they need to do, that's amazing. Do it, but understand that they're rooted in various different source codes, and those source codes, you can't mix those. Right, they're written in totally different code, totally different way of thinking about operating systems and this, that, and the other. And so that's the bit that people sort of I think are not maybe understanding, is that when people say there's incompatibility at the source code level. There's a degree of incompatibility at the operating system level. But when it comes to the end user's experience and then the applications that they might use in this sort of technological metaphor, that's more up for grabs. Now, one operating system will utilize or interface with a particular application very differently from another operating system, and the end user will have a different experience as a result of that. Just be clear about that. So I guess the call is to say, just think about it critically, use your critical thinking skills to understand where the source code is. And lots of people are very critical of the idea that suggesting that even things have a different source code and therefore a different way of operating in the real world, interfacing with human beings, like they say, that's like being really dogmatic and narrowing down and being overly restrictive, and you're not allowing people to sort of take on different ideas because it depends and all those sorts of things. And they see that as a really negative view. I don't see that as negative at all. I just think it's being true to the roots of your way of exploring, and being committed to it. Anyway.
So let's go into using something else as well in a practical approach, because two things jumped at me. Should I share this? No, I won't share the humorous one. I'll share the other one. So it's about being informed and level of informed, and then allowing you to make a decision. So I'm going to use the example because it's a pet hate of mine with personal trainers. They should be called genetic cooks and not chefs, in my opinion. We need a line between the cooks and the chefs, is the squat as an exercise. So there'll be some people that would say, through their ignorance of, if you want to grow your legs, you've got to do squats. If you just did leg press and leg curl, leg extension, you'd never grow your legs. You have to do squats, which is nonsense, by the way. And there's plenty of evidence to support that. But let's look at the squat. Somebody would go, I do 20 squats. I do squats in the gym. Yeah, I do 20 and I do 200 kilo. And then you watch them do it and they're like moving like an inch, but they're doing it with 200 kilo and they're doing 20. I says, well, you kind of are, but you're not. So then you go, okay, drop down so at least your thighs are parallel to the floor. I can't move. Now they're down to 40 kilograms on that process. But also when someone says, I can't do a squat, or I do a squat, but I've got to lean my chest forward, and somebody might say, and this is level of informed, so I might say, well, that's because you've got a long femur. So because you've got a long femur, then when you drop down to get the center balance to stop falling over, you're going to have to lean forward more. Now, here's the beauty. There is some truth in that, but that may not be the answer. Because somebody more informed would say, let me watch you squat. No, wait, let's just start off just squat. And then they may notice, you have really poor forward ankle flexion. So if this is the foot, this is the ankle, and so that they're not moving much at all. So a more informed trainer or coach would say, okay, let's just do a little test, and that may be standing against the wall, hands width from the wall with your toe, and then see when you go forward, can you touch your knee onto the wall? And they may recognize then, no, you can't. So then they would say, okay, let me give you now some work exercises that can increase that forward flexion. So once they've increased it, now do the squat, and all of a sudden now they are squatting down thigh parallel, as an example. Other angles are available, but now their trunk isn't having to go as far forward, and now they're feeling it differently. So that's an example of, yes, okay, so femur length, trunk length will be variables of biomechanics, but that ankle flexion point will be massive. Then the other point is, I want to say, well, if you want to build your glutes, do squats. And you go, well, hang on a minute. Let's look at your biomechanics and how you do it. Now you're doing a proficient squat. Actually, for you, that's a quad dominant exercise. If you want to develop your glutes, there are more effective exercises posterior trained to work. So going from the uninformed to say, oh, it's this, you've got to do this to grow. And then, oh, yeah, it's just this. Then you have a little bit of knowledge and you go, oh, no, it's because of your femur length. So that's fine. And then you get somebody that really understands it. Go, well, actually, now I'm scanning. Let's look at this element. Let's test this. Okay, let me give you some interventions here. Right now, let's reestablish. Okay, now there's an improvement. So I think that if we go back to PDS or ecological dynamics or anything else, where it's more than the sum of its parts of a word, then are we someone that would go, oh, you can't do leg press, you've got to do squats to grow your legs? Or are we in the middle somewhere? Or are we down the end? We go, oh, no. Okay, now I understand it. Now I know how I integrate it in what I do. I definitely can't do this because now I don't see value in it. It would be wrong for me to do this. I can keep this because that aligns. And in these moments, now this is my light and shade in these moments that's appropriate because now I've got a better understanding of the need of the athlete. Or in a business, the need of my employee or my manager underneath me. And I think that's the key difference is, are people spending time not saying, are you this or that? Is saying, well, hang on, let's find out what that is. Then let me find out what I'm actually doing and how I'm doing it. Alan mentioned putting the video on, recording. And that's always one of my first elements with my performance managers, coaches. Let's record. Let's see reality. You watch it back, listen. Okay, is that different than you thought? Okay, now we have some baseline. Now we can start doing some interventions. Once our reality is accurate, now we can start reviewing and making judgment interventions. But if our reality isn't effective, we might be saying, oh, I do that. Yeah, I do that really well. I don't need to change that. And everyone else is looking at you thinking, you definitely don't do that. No, I do. No, you don't. So if we don't then get them to understand, oh, actually, that's different to I thought, how are they going to make a judgment of change? Because they go, well, I don't need to change. So we've got this understanding it. Then, okay, well, how's it fit in my world? Well, how accurate do I know what I'm doing now? Aligned to, do I really know what I want to build and grow within the organization, the business, or sport? Okay, now I know those answers. Now I can see what needs to change. But now the challenge is, Stuart, is I know what I need to change, but now how am I going to change it? Where do I start? What's going to be first? How am I going to keep it alive? Who's there going to support and challenge me? Am I going to give it the time it needs for me to be relentless and patient on this thing that I'm not yet good at, that I may not get the outcome I want, for long enough to start to see the change? So this is where it all falls down. Because unless we're doing that part, then what people do, they'll dip in and out. And I'm sure you've seen it, Stuart. They'll go, oh, I gave it a go, it didn't work. What did you give a go? Oh, that thing you're talking about. What did you do? Well, I did this, and this is what happened. So I went back, and when I went back, I got better results. Okay, so you didn't actually commit to it. You didn't really understand it. You didn't put in an effective intervention. You didn't give it the time it needed for you to develop your skills, but also for the people to facilitate the change. Because if you're shifting an environment, as we know, people need to understand why the environment shifted and then get comfortable in the shift in behaviors they need to do within that environment. Understand it's not going to change back within an hour. It's not going to change back within 5 minutes, because some people will go, no, I'll just stand here, because I know if I stand here, we'll go back to that comfort zone we're in. So there's all these parameters of understanding something first, but then actually integrating it. I think that's, and Alan talked about that in the last episode, didn't he? About that, he feels sorry for coaches and managers that are on their own, that don't seek support or don't set up a environment where the assistant coach can challenge you, or an assistant manager can, whoever it is. So he sees that as, my God, why would you not do that if you want to build and make sure you're making good decisions?
Yeah, I mean, that was something that really struck me, was that whole thing of the being on the own. I mean, some people are on their own because they've got no one else. Some people are on their own because it's their way of working. And like you said, those people who almost deliberately put themselves on their own, and now he feels sorry for the fact they're not taking advantage of the insights that they could glean from others. And I thought that was a particularly astute perspective that he shared there, because it would be very easy, wouldn't it, for somebody to just think, well, I've got to be in charge of this, therefore I'm the one who has to make all the decisions. And it's so interesting, because this goes back to this point about mixing. So fundamentally, PDS for me is rooted in the idea that we as leaders or coaches, it reframes the role of a coach or a leader, and from one where we are the knowledgeable one that then determines courses of action for others, and then imparts those courses of action through a variety of methods. But largely it's centered in us as the leader with the knowledge, imparting the knowledge and providing the lead. So that, and so you're reframing that traditional notion of a leader, the knowledgeable, the skillful, the one that makes decisions, the one that directs others, to one where the person who we're engaging with, or the group that we're engaging with, are far more central to how they navigate their world. And the role we're playing is to establish the constraints and parameters around their way of working, and then to guide them and support them to stay within those parameters once they've clarified them. And it's really interesting how easy it is for people to fall out of that. So anyway, so that's the guide. So it's this guide, guide by the side is the phrase I use a lot, and it's a reconceptualization to say, this is the role I will inhabit. Now, does that mean that you never direct? No. But fundamentally, and it may be that the need is to direct, but it means that direction is something that's going to be a rarity, or it's going to feature less prominently. It's, in the main, it's going to be a much more facilitative, guiding, questioning approach that's going to, and reminding individuals of what their commitment was and all those sorts of things, honoring the commitment, stepping in when necessary, drawing people's attention to things that are happening that may or may not be in line with what they've previously agreed they were going to do. But always the athlete central. I'll give you a little example of that. I was doing a session yesterday with a group of young coaches who are coming towards sort of the end of their a course of study they're doing in an educational institution, and a really, really knowledgeable group, really curious group, and many of them working professionally as coaches and this, that, and the other. And a couple came to me at the end of the session and said they were talking about some of the sort of cultural dynamics, because obviously I used quite a lot of the PDS vernacular and put that in because they were interested in developing culture and interaction and all that sort of stuff. And one of the things they said to me was, okay, so once you've got them to pre-agree, then if they don't do it, you can use that against them. That was the language. And I was like, no. That's not what we would do. We would not use it against them, because we're not thinking about it in those terms. What we would do is we would remind them of what it was that they said they wanted. And because the likelihood is they've just lost sight of that in the moment or whatever it might be. And then get them to play back to us what that then means in terms of a change of behavior or a change of course of action or a change of activity, whatever it might be. But all right, I get it. And what that brought home was that, the underlying thinking isn't that I'm going to sort of in a sort of semi-Machiavellian sense, get all these people to pre-agree something so that the minute they don't do it, I can come down on them like a ton of bricks. Fundamentally, no, right? That's not how we even think about this approach. What we're thinking about is saying, helping a group come to a decision, or a person, for a group to come to a decision about their way of being, helping them practice live about what that means for them daily, in the face of challenges and difficulties and all those sorts of things, so that becomes something that becomes a central feature of their own operational DNA. Oh God, I've just said two things together. Operational DNA, and then it's something they did that needs less reminding and all that sort of stuff. But if you in your head is thinking, I'm doing this pre-work so that I've got this kind of what's the word I'm looking for? So I've got this almost like this tool. Yeah, exactly. Tool I can use when needed. Then you're thinking of, you're actually going to find that's probably going to work against you in lots of ways. Anyway, so that for me brings to life what I'm talking about, which is it's your fundamental why you're taking this approach. You could take that approach. You could go, I'm going to do this pre-work so that I've got a tool that I can use to sanction when needed, right? You can work on that basis, and I know lots of people who think like that and would work like that, and that's your choice. And it might work. It might work to a certain extent. It might get you so far. It might work. Personally, I can see lots and lots of limitations to that. So I would work in this other way because I feel like it's got less potential pitfalls, and ethically it maps onto my own views around how I prefer to see my role, and B, the way that they would want to interact. It's more like how I would want to, how I would want to be engaged. If I felt somebody was asking me to come up with a set of principles and practices so that at the next stage they could use it as a form of sanction, I'd find that quite difficult to agree. So I don't know. It's just an interesting, just reflecting on that conversation I was having yesterday about where people's perceptions are and how they think about these sorts of models. Yeah,
it reminds me of a few elements, Stuart. There, are you still there? Oh, there you go. I remember a while ago, sometimes on social media there's a little statement that gets thrown around and then it gets forgotten about. There was one popping around a few years ago that said, don't treat people how you want to be treated, treat people how they want to be treated. And that for me was wrong, because it's missing the concept of need-centered. So yes, so let's add something to that. Don't treat people how you want to be treated, but don't treat people how they want to be treated. Treat people how they need to be treated. Because when you're shifting culture, what they may want now is not the behaviors aligned to what they need. And that links into another little image that is still popped around now. Have you seen the image that says, what is a leader? and they've got an incorrect one and a correct one according to their parameters of leadership. And it's someone in a chariot, and then there's humans pulling a rope where horses would normally be. And the cross is the leader stood on top of the chariot pointing the direction. And they say that's wrong. And then the leader, what they say is right, is they're right at the front pulling the rope with them. So my argument is, well, if you're an effective leader, if you look at any one of those people in that image, a leader could be any of those people. But the leader could also be stood on the side. So it's understanding, actually, if you're talking about leadership, then leadership, are you the person that's finding the vision that of coming into a business that, look, I'm bringing you in because you're a visionary and you're going to give us the direction that we need? Are you someone that can facilitate that within our group of influencers and get us aligned to this direction? Or are you somebody that can actually say, I can get people to work optimally? And working optimally is interdependent. Working optimally is, how can I get you where you don't need me to always boss looking at me? I better do it this way. Is go, I've got the confidence to make the right decisions now, communicate, provide the right data, get it back from people, make great decisions, and be enthusiastic and enjoy my job. Then how can a leader influence people? So sometimes a leader will recruit senior management in because they know, I know these people, I'm changing a business around or a sport, I'll bring the assistant coaches or the managers in. The challenge with that is it's good. No question. It has an impact. But the challenge with that is what we need to make sure is those leaders, now that they brought in, or managers, they need to, have we given them the skills? So underneath that chain, as we move through a business, the bigger it is, can we influence everyone to ripple those skills into having confidence, the interdependent, making the right decision? So this is going back to that point of UAEs, Stuart, is I'm working with a few new interventions now in 2 different countries. And some of them are struggling with the word unacceptable. And I've seen it in some interventions before. It says, oh, we don't like unacceptable. So, okay, so what is it you like? You know, what word you're going to put in it? But I'm cool with you putting any word in it. But then everyone, you need to use a word in the organization. You can't have 3 or 4 words for the same thing. But it will still be whatever that is. But if you're agreeing the UAEs, the exceptional, the acceptable, the unacceptable, you as the person that's managing that interaction to get them to understand how to do it first, you're the one that needs to pull the ropes back often. You need to say, hang on a minute, we need to be capable of doing acceptable pretty much all the time if we're consistently committed within our capability. Exceptional is a reach. So let's make sure that if we're setting these, we can actually do them. And if we think we can, and I've never seen it, show me now. Let's make sure we can establish that. So now we're in unacceptable. We're saying unacceptable is something we're capable of not being in. That's the key. We're capable of not being unacceptable, not something that we just made up. So now we're really pulling them back. Say, look, let's look at these situations. Can we really do this? Okay, now we've nailed it. Okay, now we're committing to it. So now we're building that rule of 3. Yes, 1 and 2 we need to build so they can self-manage. But 3 is that when I'm coming in now, if I have to do an intervention unacceptable, which I definitely need to do if I'm seeing 1 and 2 not managing it, 2 being peers, 1 being self, my whole mentality now is I need to find out why. My head is not to find fault. My head is now is I need to identify and explore why is that unacceptable. What is it that's caused the unacceptable? Where is the source of that? Only I can do that by making sure and asking them, what have we agreed? So then that I now know they've remembered it. That's an important factor. And now, okay, so what's preventing you? And it's an inquisitive exploration of finding out, because now when I find out, now we can put in some intervention to support. There may have been grey there, may have been an interpretation element, maybe an attitudinal. Maybe now it's more difficult than they first thought. In the real world, they're going, oh my God, I've set the bar too high. It's not achievable for me. Okay, well, let's review what is now that we're all agreeable, will be acceptable for us to build where we need to get to, that we will shift as we get better. The UAEs could change. It's organic, so long as we pre-agree that process. So as soon as you start thinking about it that way, all we're saying is, look, I don't want them to do it because I'm watching them. I want them to be able to do it because they understand that's the right element to do to allow us to be successful, not because coach or boss wants me to do it. But have they set up so it's robust and achievable, all those markers? But then when they don't, can they self-manage and identify the source? If not, we can train them to do that self. If they can't, we can build peers to be able to do that. So they're not relying on three, the leader, the manager, to come in, and that's the only person that can identify the source and then deal with an intervention of change to build success. So we're not repeating the same error. But that's that point again of what is the point, the purpose of a leader, but also then, are we building the software skills in every single person that's going to commit to those actions and behaviors and choices so they can self-manage, self-evaluate and adapt? They're not waiting for someone, oh, I know I'm doing it wrong, but I'll just wait for someone to come and pull me in, which is often happens I see in businesses. So there's some real texture to when we hear people say, oh, UAEs, yeah, I've heard about that. So, well, what's your interpretation of it? How do you set it up? And what do you do when it's not there? But importantly, and this is a critical one, I know we've mentioned it many times, Stuart, is when we're seeing exceptional, I'm looking as a leader and a boss, a manager, a coach. Are they recognizing they're exceptional right now? And if they're not, I need to put an intervention then, because I do not want them to ignore the exceptionals. I do not want them to just go, oh, yeah, that's expected. No. If it's exceptional, it's definitely not expected. Otherwise, we got our lines wrong. That should be acceptable. If we're exceptional, we need to be celebrating those moments, and we need to be asking ourselves, what caused that? What do we do differently there that made it so successful? Because we need to repeat that. And this builds the motivation, the excitement, the growth of going out. We nailed an exceptional. Remember, Alan, on a few podcasts ago, he shared that point where we were working with his players before a Holland game for a qualifier with his GB team. And we just set that parameters. How long can you stay with these communication, these parameters? And they kept not making the time, they said. And eventually they built it, and then they nailed the time. They nailed something never done before, and they were excited as if they won a final, because they recognize what they did. They recognize, and that's where the exceptional stretch should be. So UAEs is not about, I'm looking now for when we don't do it well and we're going to throw interventions in. UAEs is a framework to allow people to eliminate the grey and expectations based on present capability to allow us to be successful. And we need to recognize and celebrate the whys and the whats in the exceptional. And we need to be really inquisitive to understand what caused the unacceptable and what can we do to allow us to reduce and prevent that from happening again.
Yeah. God, there's so much to unpack. Something you just said there, actually, and it's an interesting area that I think probably does need a little bit more explanation, is how do you go about establishing UAEs